Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our Daily Penguin. This is a waddle through all the penguins that I currently own, ever have owned, ever intend to own, or that ever are going to be made. So it's a lot of penguins to go through. I don't know that these videos will be every day. I've been having a blast. I really, really like talking about these books. And a number of you have said, boy, oh boy, I thought I recognized the levels of your enthusiasm, but this is more. This is not more, but different. A number of you have commented on that, and it's true. Uh, I love talking about these books, but I'm still not sure that this will be every day. I don't want to build a base repertoire on this channel that obligates me to do 6 or 7 videos a day. I think that's spoiling you, or in both cases, in both senses of the word. But we're going back to poetry today. We're going back to 8th century China. So the Tang dynasty, the great Tang dynasty. This is a penguin volume called The Poems of Wang Wei, and it is translated by G.W. Robinson. And I'm not going to go through the same diatribe about initials in Penguin Classics, so we're going to call this guy Gwabinson, just to simplify it in that way. And it is, as you can see, a tiny book, uh, and it need not be, because we have these are poems that Wang Wei wrote throughout his life. He was an official. He was an official with the government. He had a paying day job, and did fairly well. I mean, money was never a blithe concern for him, but he had uh, a comfortable life. Most of the time, a comfortable life. There was a horrible interruption in that comfort late in his life, when there was a revolution, and he had to decide, if you're a peaceful government bureaucrat and there's a revolution, well, you're going to find the crosshairs trained on you, regardless of how offensive or not you've been. But it was mostly a comfortable life that allowed him to have a regular routine, a retinue, and also famously a place in the country. He had an estate in the country that he loved, and that was the wellspring for a lot of his poetry. Uh, Gwabinson points out in his introduction to this book and in his notes something that you would also be pointed out if you could find a full-length biography of this person in English. Despite the fact that it's been 1,500 years, there is ample material to write a full-length biography of this person, and yet I don't know of one. If there is one from a popular press, I've never seen it. But when you read that information, you come to one conclusion ahead of anything else, which is that Wang Wei and his contemporaries, both in the government and in the artistic world, would have been amazed if he were remembered now as a poet, because he was a painter, extremely skilled painter. As far as we know, we don't have none of his paintings survive. Another perfect example of how books are the only true immortality, not paintings, not even sculpture, but books, because anybody can make a book, right? If you make a beautiful sculpture of Apollo ravishing a nymph, uh, and it's like nothing the world has ever seen, well, okay, then your friends and neighbors and visitors to your city can go and look at it. But it takes a skill well outside the norm, even to inexpertly duplicate it, and that would take a long time and the raw materials. Whereas somebody with a hammer could come by tomorrow and destroy it. Whereas a book, it's easy to duplicate a book. You don't need to have any talent at all, and much less anything like the talent of the author, to duplicate that author's work. Which is why books can get around. They can be copied and handed over and whatnot. So we know Wang Wei now from his poems rather than from his painting. And in his own day, there would have been also a voluminous public record of his decisions, speeches, memoranda. Did he write a biography? Did somebody write a biography of him? A biography that wouldn't even have thought to mention his poetry or his painting. All of that stuff mostly is lost, but we have over 400 of his poems, and there's like 100 in this book. Why? Why is that? Gwabinson makes some in his introduction. He makes some vague reference to problems with the Chinese. In fact, in his introduction and his notes, he takes some jabs at Chinese just in general. Almost, I mean, he translates this, and he studied ancient Japanese and ancient Chinese, but he makes jabs and little comments all throughout this that almost lead you to believe that that either he didn't actually have a working command of ancient Chinese, or that he was tired of dealing with insults of people saying that he didn't. It's an odd touchiness that is, this thing came out, what, 70 years ago? 1973. So that's half a century. That's a long time. There's an odd touchiness here that still comes through. But this is a classic, no pun intended, a normal Penguin classic. It's got a good introduction, a good translator's note, and maps, and then the translations themselves with contextualizing bits and pieces for why the author chose a tiny fraction of Wang Wei's output when it's a miracle that we have these at all. So why not do them all? Why not one thick Penguin book? With all the contextualization in the world you want, no matter how much extra space it takes, why not do the ultimate Wang Wei book? But they don't. They didn't. In his own day, Wang Wei, and ever since, his verses have been viewed as very low key. They're very sedate. They are fog at sundown type poems. Moody, most of them, a lot of them. Some of them are not. Some of them are very much involved with the political and social events of his day, commenting on them, and some of those events were violent. And people, real people, find their way into his poems. Not nearly enough of the ones that are in this book. Was Robinson afraid of contextualization? Was that maybe too much work for what I'm sure was the pittance he was paid by Penguin to do this? I have no idea. I don't know why I'm dealing with these old Penguin classics that are not what they should be. It's frustrating. This should be the complete Wang Wei, and it's not. But even if it were, it would still be much of a piece. Even the poems that drag in current events or that talk about contemporaries or whatnot still do so in a very sedate manner. These are sedate poems. They are not usually larger than life. They are not usually arm waving. They are not usually trying to pretend that the poet is drunk when he's writing or anything like that. And in that way, they stand in the shadow of his two Tang Dynasty contemporaries, Tu Fu and especially Li Po. I don't have any idea in 2025 what academic censors, fascists, speech police, I have no idea what they say now is the non-Hitler way to stylize those names, in those two names in English. Tu Fu and Li Po are the ways that I learned those names. Probably my even saying that means that I will never work in academia again. Even saying it, even without knowing the alternatives, because those two versions mean that I am unmitigatedly evil in everything I do, and I kick puppies. But that's because academia has lost its mind and is losing its people as a result. But I have no idea what the current fashioning of those names is. But those two figures are gigantic poets, gigantic literary figures from the Tang Dynasty, and they tend to put Wang Wei a little in the shade. They're more vivid. Their poems are more vivid, more active, more enthusiastic. I still like these, even in Guabinson's rendition. I want to read you a couple of his renditions just to give you a hint of what kind of a job he does. Like, for instance, Wang Wei wrote a sequence of poems about his country place. He had his country mansion or his estate was on the Wang River. And it was him, it was friends, it was servants, it was any visitor who came by and needed a place to stay, and also his mother, who lived there in a separate house on his estate for a long time. Wang Wei, 1,500 years ago, experienced the exact same thing that I have experienced, and a couple of other people I know have experienced, maybe you have, where you grow out of childhood with your parents, in this case your mother. His father is conspicuously absent from his writing, but you grow out of childhood with your mother and find that you can be friends, that the two of you can be friends. And there's no friendship like that. There's no friendship that could be like that. What other friendship could you have with someone who saw you in the first seconds that you saw the air, that you saw sunlight? No other friend knows you like that. And if you can reach that point where you're not defensive about that and they're not overlording about that, then it's an amazing friendship. And it happened to him. And he lived in this estate and wrote a lot about it. Wrote very quiet, lovely little poems about it. Let me read you. One of them, or maybe two. Uh, like Lake Pavilion. Uh, Light boat to meet the honored guest. Far, far advancing over the lake, we gain the balcony and sit with our wine, and lotuses are opening all about. It's very quiet, right? But it shows you the whole of the activity. It's not just a moment. It's your guest coming from a great distance, and you eagerly waiting, and then the quiet, then the peace of resolution there. What else do we have? How about one? There's one here that Gwabinson calls Dogwood Bank. The fruit is forming red and yet green, and it is as if flowers were opening again. If I detain a visitor in these hills, I may offer him this dogwood cup. And you'd have to know what is being talked about there to really get the full impart of the poem about. It's like a flower is blossoming again. If you cut a certain fruit, and then you're getting a wash of color. But let's move on to something different. This is the Chungnan Mountains. That's what Gwabinson calls it. Tai nearly touching the citadel of heaven, chain of hills down to the edge of the sea, white clouds closing over the distance, blue haze, nothing comes into view. The central peak transforms the whole track. Dark and light the valleys, each way distinct. If I want a lodging for the night here, across the river, there's a woodman I may ask. I myself think that even in what I think is a fairly stodgy English, that is lovely. And that you get throughout Wang Wei. That poem is lovely. The narrator of the poem is looking at the way that the sunset changes this landscape, which is dramatic enough on its own. Suddenly it's changing even more. And at the end of the poem, he's thinking, well, I'm watching the sunset and I'm very much enjoying it, but I may need to sleep. I may need night's lodgings. And there might be a humble little hut that I can go to for that. It's very peaceful. It's if I want a lodging for the night here, across the river, there's a woodsman I may ask. May. So we're not even sure. There's not even a decision in the poem. It's just that simple. Uh, and that is lovely, I think. And you get a lot of that in here. But I don't believe that the paltry 100 or so poems that are in this book were chosen just for loveliness or for that Wang Wei moment. I don't believe that. I don't know what the rationale was. I have no idea what the rationale would be for including a maimed fraction of this author's work when this author didn't write enough to overload a book. Why not include it all? Maybe they did, or maybe they will. A Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition, nice big fat thing with lots of illustrations, lots of Tang era illustrations. None by Wang Wei, but still, and everything by this author would be great. But in the meantime, that is your Penguin Classic for today. Now, we might experiment with scheduling for your Daily Penguin by not doing one tomorrow. I don't know. Is that going to cause rioting in the provinces? Just let me know. But I'll be back either way. So I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.